My name is Aaliyah Genji, and I'm here with Roma Fueres and John Moldo, and today we're going to be presenting the evolution of partisan voting behavior in the Supreme Court. So what our project does is using Supreme Court justice voting behavior, so seeing how they voted on the case, we wanted to see if we could predict the political party of the president that nominated him or her to the court. And there's many reasons to explore this topic, but the three reasons that were most interesting to us was number one, the Supreme Court is supposed to be a non-political institution, and justices are supposed to uphold the Constitution free of religious or personal biases. We wanted to explore if that's actually true. Number two is in the most recent years, politics in the U.S. have become more divided. We wanted to see if these divisions have sullied the court also. And number three, most recently in early May, a draft of a opinion of that would overrule Roe versus Wade was leaked, and this has brought a lot of attention to the court, and we wanted to explore the court and justices' decisions in more depth. So let's talk about the data. We had about 10,000 cases from the Washington University School of Law. They had a database online. After cleansing it, it was about 9,692. We had about 39 justices in the database from 1946 to 2020. And we looked at a variety of cases. You could see it's a pretty balanced data set with cases related to criminal procedure, federal taxation, unions, so a lot of different cases. And also we scraped the political party of the president that appointed the judge to the court. To talk a little bit more about the cases, I've selected three so you can have a better understanding. An example of a civil rights case is one that's called Yellen versus Confederate Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation. And this was when the Alaskan Native population sued Janet Yellen, who's in charge of the Treasury Department, for not receiving COVID-19 CARES funds. And you can see the decisions are not so clear-cut. The majority was a mixture of both Republican and Democrats, and the dissent was also a mixture of both, and it went 6-3. Another example of a case that we worked with is a First Amendment case where a student and her family sued a school district over the right of whether the school has the right to regulate a student's social media posts. And you can see the majority also is a mixture of Democrat and Republicans, and the dissent was one very conservative Republican judge. And lastly, we have economic activity. So another example of this would be when the NCAA was sued by college athletes over the rights of receiving non-cash education-related benefits, and the justices all ruled in favor of the college athletes in this case. So you can see the cases are not so clear-cut. The judges vote with different behaviors, but with the big data, we can see if there's 9,000 cases, we can see if there's patterns with our justices.
So keeping in mind the motivation that Aaliyah has explained, and with the data that we've collected, the question that we want to answer is, do judges vote accordingly to the lines of the party of the president that appointed them? So is the Supreme Court more political than we actually think? And to answer this question, we have developed an approach in 3 steps. So our main objective is to measure the quality of the predictions that we can make of the partisanship of each of the justices in the Supreme Court based on how aligned they are in terms of their voting behavior. So what we want to do here is to begin by building an alignment graph. Alignment being the alignment in voting behavior. As you can see here, we are building a weighted, undirected graph. Each of the nodes are the different justices in the Supreme Court, and the weights on each of the edges are the share of opinions on which 2 justices have voted the same. On this graph, for example, we can see that Justice 1 and Justice 4 have frequently voted in favor of the same opinion or against the same opinion, but both equally. Justice 1 and Justice 2 have two very different voting behaviors. So we have built one such graph per composition of the Supreme Court. And the reason why we've done that is because two justices that have never voted on the same opinion, it's very hard to assess how aligned they are in terms of voting behavior. Alright, so the step 2 of our approach is to run a spectral clustering algorithm on each of the graphs that we've built. In this case, the spectral clustering algorithm has decided to put Justice 1 and Justice 4 in the same cluster, and Justice 2, 3, and 5 in the second cluster. For step 3, we're actually looking at the prediction. To do the prediction for one of the justices, let's take the example of Justice 2 in gray, we're looking at how many of the other justices in the same clusters are either Democratic or Republican. In this case, our prediction for the probability of Justice 2 to be a Republican is going to be 1/2, because among the two other justices in the same cluster, one is a Republican and the other one is a Democrat.
We decided to plot the prediction power of the Supreme Court justices over time, the prediction power of their parties. And we see that starting in the 40s, the prediction power is very weak. However, around 1990, we start to get better and better. And by 2009, when Barack Obama was elected, we see that prediction power is absolutely perfect. There's zero MSC loss, which means that these courts have become very biased right at that moment. However, and then looking at civil rights, First Amendment, and privacy cases, we see that this trend actually started a bit earlier. So these biases were creeping into the courts a bit earlier than in the overall system. But again, it's also very clear at 2009. And we see that in some cases, like economic activity, so those topics, this trend isn't very clear. There isn't an inherent or very obvious bias to these justices for some cases. However, like we just saw earlier, there are clear biases in other cases.
To wrap things up, as John has noted, the Supreme Court, the justices have become more and more partisan, voting in line with the president who appointed him or her to the court. And this is important because this increasingly partisan behavior is a threat to democracy and the nature of the court. And also important to note is that a president being able to fill multiple seats in a single term can shift the entire judicial system, which we've seen in our study. So next steps, where are we going to go from here? We'd like to extend our model to the Senate and the House of Representatives to study the voting behavior there, especially since the nature of the Senate, it changes every 2 years in midterm elections and every 4 years in presidential elections, and same thing with the House of Representatives. So studying how their voting behaviors might have changed. Number 2, we'd like to scrape the opinions cited for each case and similarly create a predictive model instead of using the voting behaviors, using the opinions that judges cite and whether we can predict political party based on that. And lastly, we'd like to make this really relevant to upcoming cases. So, for example, the same-sex marriage case that was determined in 2015 was voted with a majority of 5 justices. Three of those justices who are no longer on the court and have been replaced by a more conservative voice. And then the minority opinion at the time was 4 justices, 3 of them who are still on the court. So using the new court that is there and using also the information we have about how previous justices that are on the court have voted, determining how future cases could be decided. Thank you for listening to our presentation. Hope you enjoyed it.